Hey everyone, welcome to this podcast called Ken Reads, where I can read out your letter that you've shared with me in the hopes that I can better help you understand what the F just happened between you and the last partner you were dating, whether it was in a relationship or a situationship. I look at these experiences from the lens of attachment theory. I don't just come up with thought terminating cliches like, they're just not that into you, or if they wanted to, they would. While some of those phrases might have their benefit in other dynamics, I try and look at this from the lens of, is there perhaps an insecure attachment issue that's at play in these particular dynamics? And though I am an Australian counsellor, I am not someone who is going to be responding to these letters as if I was with a client. I'm here to provide validation, yes, but I can't provide any diagnoses on these. So even if, a lot of people might understandably hear this and be like, well, that sounds like a narcissist. At best, I'll probably say, sounds a bit narky. I probably won't go any further than that out of respect to my ethical boundaries in regards to what I can and can't do. If you find this of benefit to you, fantastic. That's what I want. And if you want to submit your letter, you're very welcome to, once there is obviously availability per month. And I'll happily read out and share my own 2 cents as to what I think has gone on in your dating experience to offer you a sense of validation for what you've been through, and also to give other people listening a chance to feel like maybe this relates to what they've also experienced as part of collective healing. So with that all out of the way, let's dive in to the latest letter. Our next letter comes from Moon. And before I get into Moon's letter, I just want to say that the subject matter of this letter really resonated for me on the basis that it involves themes of magical thinking. It involves very intense romantic experiences for those of us that identify LGBTQI plus. And the reason I'm particularly interested in this is because people who suffered a lot of marginalization, trauma, neglect are very, very prone to limerence, magical thinking, and becoming very obsessed with emotionally unavailable partners and falling in love with them. The two things can go hand in hand, and it can make for these very soul bendy, twin flamey, tragic experiences on the whole. And so let's dive straight into Moon's letter because I'm keen to detail and unpack this with everyone. So, Moon writes, Dear Ken, first of all, words cannot express the gratitude I have for you and your work that pulled me through one of the hardest times in my life and gave me some validation and healing. Thank you. Moon, you're very welcome. And thank you very much for the kind words. So, Moon writes, I had a friend. We were friends first, and we were both dancers living in Los Angeles. I live in a city and work environment of showbiz, which is understandably full of narcissism, but that's a story for another time. Let's get back to talking about this friend. Me and this friend would run into each other at dance auditions and classes and also at the gym. Our friendship started when we were exchanging workout tips, and from here on out, he consulted me whenever he needed advice in the realms of dance, love, life, workouts. Then the pandemic happened, and he was living in a van. Since I felt the streets were dangerous, I offered him to park in front of my home and later in my parking lot. Also, I helped him to get through unemployment during the pandemic. He would often come over to my home whilst I was cooking dinner. At one point, I decided to offer him an opportunity to come and have dinner with me. Once a while turned into almost every night. It would also then turn into lunch as well as breakfast. And then it became a routine of breakfast, lunch, and dinner with my friend. And the pandemic wasn't easy on any of us. So I thought, as per my upbringing, it's being part of Asian culture, you help a friend in need and you give what you can, and things will come back to you in some sort of way out of a place of generosity. But if not from him, maybe from someone else. I want to take a moment here to say, Moon, I'm actually really glad that you raised this because I think that a lot of people, particularly of, very inclusive cultures, like, say, by inclusive, let me be very clear what I mean by that. Cultures that really espouse my home, your home, if you will, have, I think, a very beautiful vibe of trying to involve people, as well as also believing that if I do good, someday the universe will return that generosity in return. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that attitude. I will say something just to be very mindful of is that whilst there is always room, I think, for kindness, generosity, and allowing others to be the beneficiary of your largesse, I think it's really important to be mindful of when this can start to turn into boundary crossings. And even though a lot of circumstantial things were going on, like the pandemic, and everyone was sequestered, and we all had to do the best we could with the limited resources that we had, I feel like with this friend, it'd be very easy for this to turn into almost a very roommatey and even romantic vibe very quickly. And when we're also engaging with people who are very vulnerable, people who lack the resources, they don't have the means to take care of themselves, it's very easy for us to turn into the caretaker, parent, therapist role for these individuals. So I'm not saying this is necessarily you, Moon. I haven't read the rest of your letter at this point, sorry, before now. But I just want to take a moment here to say, if you have values around generosity, being a good person, wonderful. I think the only thing I would say is be very careful not to let those great values go to people who might take advantage of you, because even if you're doing kindness to one person, it doesn't mean those people will necessarily return the favor. And the universe at times can unfortunately be a bit capricious and try and teach us some lessons about where we pour our energy. So, with that all being said, I think it's one of those things where just good to be aware of these sort of things. Anyways, Moon continues. Once the pandemic restrictions were lifted, I rejoined my gym, and since I had an extra guest, I let him join me. And so our routine became breakfast, gym, lunch, and also dinner every day of the week. I have to also make a point here to say that my friend had never contributed to any of the meals that we shared together, but I also never asked him to. I want to take a moment here, Moon, just to say, on one hand, fair enough. Like if you felt like, oh, I don't mind doing this, it's no, weight off my back. I'm happy to be this generous. More power to you. I think the dangerous thing of this, though, is that when we don't have boundaries and we also negotiate with this, is that it's very easy to be taken advantage of. And even if this guy is not someone who is malicious or trying to do harm to you, the danger I find can be that for a lot of these people who just sort of, don't have any personal accountability and they're not looking to pay you back and actually have a dedicated time frame, is that they will find every excuse under the sun to avoid reciprocity. So, one thing I will say, as someone who was in this experience many, many years ago, is that I think learning for a lot of people who might be in a similar position, because believe me, there's many people who are like this, is just be very mindful of your boundaries around this, because, like I was saying before, it's very easy for kind actions and generosity to easily be taken advantage of. And it's very easy to fall back onto the, well, I'm such a nice person, how could this happen to me? Unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't pay to be, a generous person to everyone. But that's a story for another day. Let's continue with Moon's story. Through diet, a workout program, my friend's body naturally started to change and he became lean and muscular. And along with his changes to his body, his confidence also improved. One day, he started to kiss me and our friendship turned sexual. There we go. For 3 days. And then he found a reason. Oh, sorry. Our friendship turned sexual for 3 days, but then he found a reason to back off for a month. Wow. During which time we kept our normal routine, because we were friends before everything. I told myself, oh dear. Oh dear. Okay, this is a great example of very covert hot cold stuff going on. So, like I was saying earlier, it's interesting how this transitioned from mere acquaintances passing at the gym to then escalating to roommates, then to lovers. And it's interesting because it doesn't seem like there's any real definition for what's going on here. It seems like neither of you really said, what are we doing? Like, I know that's a very awkward question to ask, and there's better ways to go about it, but it seems like there is no boundary in this whatsoever. It's just sort of been this very, and I could imagine this was quite romantic and also very fun. Like, I could imagine it would have been quite amazing to just sort of like go with the flow of it all as it just sort of escalated from one thing to the next. And, it does have very tantalizing romantic elements to it too. So I kind of get it. It's kind of cute, when you think of like, this just, you know, sizzling chemistry brewing from like the days when you were just, hanging out at the gym to then living out the pandemic. And then things just started to, get very hot and steamy off the back of that. But what scares me is the fact that this guy backed off after 3 days of doing that. He obviously got very scared. And it sounds to me like there's a fear of intimacy issue coming in because based on your letter, there's no reason to justify this sort of behavior. And it seems interesting how there was a rationalization here, Moon, where, you went back to thinking, well, we were friends before everything. And I could imagine that if you didn't have understanding of like fear of intimacy, and when you're in this situation, it's very hard to see the forest from the trees, right? It's very hard to sort of separate yourself and see what's actually going on because when you are in this position where you've done all this sort of good stuff, and then you have this escalated moment of sleeping together, and then all of a sudden he backs away and then rejoins you later. It can be very easy to sort of sweep that under the rug because even though it's not an overt gesture, right? Like he hasn't punched you, he hasn't, called you names. He's just backed off for a few days, right? And it's very easy to internalize that and think, have I done something wrong? Have I scared him off? When it's very hard for us, I think, to sort of step back from this and go, this is really not okay behavior. Like, it's not okay that this guy who I've been so generous with, who hasn't, reciprocated, has now, off the back of, kissing me and also us sleeping together. So he's initiated that from the sounds of it. It's not okay that he's just suddenly backed off for 3 days without actually explaining himself. So there's already a lot of under communicating going on here. And I definitely could imagine that it would have been very easy to just sort of try and rationalize a lot of this away without really maybe sitting with what was going on. And to be fair to you, that's okay. Like, I mean, if you've never been in a situation like this, believe me, I've done this before as well too. It's so easy to make excuses for this behavior when you don't understand what's going on. And when you've invested a lot more time and emotion and you get more romantically entangled with people like this. So Moon continues. Again, a month later, he came back and initiated something romantic. Every time prior, before getting sexually intimate, he often told me the most beautiful things I'd like to hear. Like, being with you, I feel like being the best version of myself. Or, I like myself around you. With the new body, the confidence, I'd go to auditions differently and I'd book more dance jobs. And every time, and that was stuff that the friend was saying. And then says off the back of this, every time my friend would go for a dance job 2 or 3 weeks at a town, I'd barely hear anything from him. Once in a while, I get a perfunctory, hey, what's up? Or a dismissive, busy TTYL, but nothing any deeper than that. There was no deep, meaningful conversations, especially while he was out of town when he wasn't with me. Can I just say already, this is so not okay. You've basically given this guy food, shelter, and also made him look hot and sexy, right? You've basically given him a new lease on life, and he's controlling this relationship so much now, right? Like, even if it's not really overt control, He's controlling the intimacy between the two of you. He's not even yeah, English. He's not respecting you. He's not thanking you for all the work you've done. God, most people would die to have, a chance to look prettier. And I know, and I'm not here to really talk about, some of the understandable insecurities that are related to that, right? But, a lot of people would kill to have all the generosity you've poured into this guy. You've gone above and beyond for him to help him with his confidence, with, basic needs being met. And he is just, he's treating you terribly right now, even though, again, it's not overt abuse, it's very covert abuse. Moon continues. This hot and cold behavior went on for, oh my God, for almost 3 years. With this intermittent reinforcement, I was hooked like a drug addict, waiting for my next breadcrumb. During the pandemic, we also made plans to go together on a road trip. And we also planned that for when restrictions would be lifted, we would head out straight away. But the moment they lifted and we had the weekend off, he decided to go on a trip on his own. That's terrible. And there again, I didn't hear anything from him until he got back. This is so fucked up. Man, this is such bad behavior. During this time, my confidence started to dwindle. While during times of intimacy, he told me nice things, but during the time of the discard, he randomly said weird stuff I wouldn't even say to an enemy. So I often thought that I must have heard wrong. So in my brain, I dismissed it such as, well, people often look at you and want to talk to you or seem to be attracted, but I wish I could feel that attraction towards you. Or Moon would often reflect and think, I have a big weakness for dancers who book a lot of jobs, who are heavy hitters, but maybe for some reason you were never on my radar. So it's interesting how Moon in this particular situation, once again, is rationalizing a lot of this behavior. And I can tell that, like, with the power of hindsight, he's obviously been able to figure out, hey, there's something not quite right here, especially because, I'm in a home, I'm quite well established, I book jobs quite easily. This guy, on the other hand, is still living in a van. I think there's a bit of a disparity here on who's doing well with what. Anyways, Moon continues. During the pandemic, I also learned a new type of body work. And so I spent a lot of nights doing body work on him and fixing his hip or knee or whatever he injured during dance classes, audition, etc. So our routine was often breakfast at my place, gym, lunch, dinner, then body work. And after that, we talk about our traumas that had occurred in the past, obviously, but that had come out as a consequence of the bodywork. Just quick note for anyone who's interested in this. So people who often do trauma-informed yoga or any somatic work might often find that when they move in a particular position, they might find that it also brings out a bit of emotion in them, which links to the past. And people with avoidant attachment are particularly vulnerable to this because often due to their suppression, that emotion's got to go somewhere. So often when they're moving around, they might have a moment where they just break out into tears all of a sudden without realizing what's going on. It can happen to anyone, but it is one of those things where somatic movement can trigger people who've got a lot of suppressed stuff that they're not aware of. It also means like, in those moments, they're not usually compartmentalizing their stuff nearly as well. So that can very much be a thing. During this time, we often talk about his childhood, his upbringing. Apparently, his father was physically present, though depressive and mentally absent throughout all of his teenage years, and his mother also never showed any emotions. Wonderful. That's a recipe for emotional unavailability. During this time, I gave him various self-help books to read and to also work on himself. I gave him attachment questionnaires to fill out, and he turned out to be a fearful avoidant. We also talked about his internalized homophobia and unconscious biases. Wow. So you have gone, Moon, you have gone from being generous caregiver to personal trainer to bodywork provider and now to coach and therapist. You're wearing many hats in this relationship, and yet he remains the same, which is the client. And as the client in this undefined relationship, he is definitely benefiting way too much from this experience where it doesn't seem like you're getting much in return. I could only imagine how hooked on breadcrumbs you must be at this particular point in time. But hey, out of respect to you, Moon, I just want to say, if you've never been in a situation like this, I can understand how this might have happened. But it's just one of those things to be very careful of going forward, that you just be very careful of your boundaries because you're obviously very giving. I like that about the sound of you in the sense that I think it's wonderful that you're someone who naturally loves to provide a lot of love to others. But I'd urge a lot of temperance and also boundaries going forward off the back of this. For almost 3 years, the cycle kept repeating itself, and after a few days of intimacy, he broke it off for a month or two. Jesus. He also didn't like how tactile I was. But then I saw him holding hands with other people with no issue. Often in times of intimacy, he started to talk about his past situationships with this one guy from ages ago, and he started to compare me with him, or brought up random memories with the other guy, reminiscent and almost putting him on a pedestal. I now know it's the Phantom X phenomenon. You bet it is. Mind you, um, if anyone ever tried to label what we had, he would have dismissed it. Yeah, of course he has. I think this links back to what you said about his internalized homophobia. It's kind of goes back to what we've talked about in the past, where I've talked about a lot of women who've dated men who are avoidantly attached with a lot of repressed misogyny and how it comes out. So this doesn't surprise me. But I think, can you just see also how intentional his behavior is, right? He's able to hold hands with other people, yet he's not able to hold hands with you. This is just cruel. Like, this guy is just not okay with what he's doing. One day, he finally booked his dream job, and I was very happy for him. He booked a world tour with a famous singer. During rehearsal, he often consulted me and came to me to get his body fixed. And days before he left for the tour, we were again intimate. The day before he left, he told me that he loved me. I told him the same and also told him that I need him to keep me updated on his life and not go mute on me. Good on you. And that's when he quote unquote said, "What's up?" Oh, sorry. And that's when I added, "What's up?" and TTYL won't suffice in text exchanges. And then guess what happened? Shortly after all of this, out of sight, out of mind, the point where there was a concert next to my home with the artist and the tickets were sold out months in advance. And even though he had completed tickets, he didn't even ask me if he should reserve one for me, while all the other dancers in his team did ask me months in advance if I wanted their ticket. But I was stupid enough to wait on him to make me an offer to invite me to this concert. This incident with him, barely reaching out to me, hurt me deeply. And me seeing him posting social media pictures of him hugging and holding hands with people, even though he told me how much he disliked people touching me, sorry, even though he told me how much he disliked people touching him, brought me to finally to a breaking point. And I told him how I felt and also shared my disappointment, which was met, oh Jesus, with dismissiveness and no accountability. So I broke it off and went no contact. Good on you. For which I was accused of abandoning him on multiple occasions via text or voicemail. This is a very fearful avoidant response, right? He's controlling the intimacy. He does whatever he wants to do. He goes off to do this big concert, and prior to that, he's telling you, "I love you." Then he gets to have his cake and eat it too by just abandoning you. And then he has the audacity to say, "You're abandoning me." Bro, you did this to yourself. You were choosing to be flirty and intimate with all these other guys, despite saying that you didn't like hand holding. You are an abusive person. Not okay. Once the tour with the artist was over, he moved back to my area. He now lives in my area in his van. He joined my gym, but I've changed my workout schedule so I don't have to run into him. Good on you. 6 months after our no contact, he reached out to me saying, "I was hopeful to see you at the gym this morning and felt the desire to have communication and see how everything was going on with me as of late." I never answered his text message because I knew the day he reached out to me was the day he just got fired from the job and they were looking for a new dancer to replace him. I got the casting call from my agent. He was reaching out to me in the hopes for me to take him in, make him feel better, but I didn't have it in me to give it anymore. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction or give back into a one-sided relationship. Can I just say here, well fucking done. I could imagine there may have been a part of you that would have maybe fawned and been like, "Oh, maybe I'll give him another chance. Maybe he'll finally appreciate me." But I love the fact that you knew the context for why he was reaching out, which was the fact that he'd just been fired from his job. I mean, wow. Well, that's karma. but also just wow that he was looking to use you as a source of external validation. Fuck him. I don't usually say that, but just fuck him. I know that he may not be trying to be Machiavellian or malicious, but his behavior is just so wrong and so not okay and so hurtful. And I love the fact that you were just like, I can't do this anymore, and you just didn't do it. So well done to you, because I can imagine how bloody hard it would have been. Prior to this experience with being with this guy, I was a happy person. I wasn't looking for a relationship and didn't really know what anxiety was. Welcome to the club. After this experience with him, I barely recognize myself. I now have anxiety. I'm insecure. I used to see the best in people, but ever since then, I see myself going through life warily with a lot of mistrust for others. I've lost my passion for dance because, for one, I don't want to run into him, and all my interactions with many dancers, I see the same patterns that we had where it can be very opportunistic. I've also started to look into other friendships where I'm just giving and never get anything in return. There we go. And I just want to take a moment here to say, Moon, I've had the same issue happen to me, and I had to learn that I had to pull back and I had to make some radical, radical changes to my friendship groups. I have to tell you, I did a bit of a friendship audit, and there were not many that survived that experience. It was hard, did not love doing it, hated doing that, to be honest. But I got to tell you, my reciprocity with people who could reciprocate went up through the roof, and there were fewer and fewer one-sided relationships off the back of it. So good on you. To my surprise, I lost a whole community within a short span of time. Me too. It's been 2 years since my no contact with this guy. Why am I the one still hurting and second guessing myself and my decision? Trauma. There is still a part of me that hopes he'll wake up one day and reach back out to acknowledge his mistakes and is finally vulnerable to me and opens up. How can I let go of my magical thinking? Oh my God. I want to tell you now, Moon, I really, really, really resonate with that last part. But I want to tell you, I'm so fucking proud of you for doing what you did, doing the friendship cutoff with a lot of people. And I too lost like so many people when that happened. And like I said, on one hand, it was absolutely necessary and thank God. But oh my God, like it was not a fun period because I then realized, holy shit, I've got no one. And I think the more you work on yourself, that just becomes a bit of a norm for a while before you find people who are very like-minded to yourself. So fortunately, it's not a curse that you'll be with no one forever if you were ever worried about, yeah, if you were worried about that. But the whole I'm still hurting, like why am I still hurting 2 years after the fact? There's probably a lot of unresolved grief, rage, probably a feeling of of not having justice off the back of this too. But the thing that I'm hearing at the moment, which is sort of like coming out with this letter that I'm hearing, is this part of hope, of hoping he realizes what he's done and apologize. I don't think he's going to. This is a guy who's shown that he can be very dismissive towards you when you try and hold him accountable. And this is a guy that doesn't sound like he wants to own up to his mistakes. He just wants to, use you like a parent who dole out time, cash, and food and resources for him whenever he wants it. So I think that what I would say to you is that when you say, why am I the one still hurting and second guessing my decision? I think there's also probably a lot of legacy guilt and shame off the back of that as well, too. Maybe not shame, maybe more. I think it's more of that thing of like, have I made the right choice? What have I done? Maybe I want to reach out again. There can also be a bit of what I call manufactured guilt, where we often feel not real guilt, where guilt I would define as when we've done something that goes against our values, whereas manufactured guilt is just anxiety of making the wrong choice and offending other people. You see that a lot from survivors of very emotionally unavailable families. But I think the relevance here in this particular story is that there's obviously, in addition to that hope, that piece that's still out there too. And I think that when you ask the question, how do I let go of my magical thinking? I think there's a few things that you can do to help you. I think that one thing that really helped me was I had to journal a lot on my hope. And I also found that I actually had to, it's going to sound oxymoronic, but hear me out. I actually had to find evidence to see if there was ever any positive chance of this working out. And do you know what's really interesting is that it didn't bring me hope to read the stories, hear my clients read out these letters about people's experiences. It actually gave me depression. But that depression was ultimately necessary to make me realize there is no hope in these cases. I actually needed to see it for what it was. I don't think optimism is a bad trait in people. I love optimism. But the problem with optimism is in this case is that it implies that people are all capable of change when they're not. And a lot of these people with severe avoidant attachment, like this guy, do not want to get, like, they may on one hand say they want to get better, but their resistances to actually doing the work are staggeringly high. I remember when I read The Truth by Neil Strauss, I was hoping beyond all hopes that he, in his journey, spoiler warning, would, after all his time in therapy, Sex Addicts Anonymous, doing all this research, would be able to make a relationship work with his then ex. When I found out that he not only failed again to maintain a relationship with his ex, that actually brought me to a place of despair temporarily for about 2 weeks where I realized, oh shit, like even with all the best resources in the world, all the willingness to want to work on this, it still wasn't enough. And it then came to my mind that there probably isn't going to be hope for the layperson who's severely avoidantly attached. There is nothing they can do. So I think that hope actually kind of needs to go. And that's where I think you might enter a bit of a depressive episode just for a bit, just to allow your brain to realize, wow, okay, there are some people here who will be able to make it work, and there are a lot of other people who won't. I guarantee you that if you bumped into your ex in the future, he'd probably still be very similar to who he is right now. So, yeah, bit of a shame. Any case, just rounding out this letter reading. Moon writes, at this point, I want to thank you for you, the work that's helped carry me through the past few months and years. I finally feel seen and heard seeing your posts, knowing that I'm not alone in this experience. So thank you. Big hugs from Moon. Moon, I'm going to verbally reciprocate. Thank you for your kind words. Big hugs back to you. And I'm sorry you went through this. Like I said at the beginning of this letter reading, I am very passionate about stories like this because they remind me of my own. And like I said, people who've grown up marginalized due to discrimination, trauma, poverty, and also been alienated by different cultural environments as well too, are very vulnerable to these experiences. And I think it's really important for people to learn and temper their traits around optimism, boundary. It's not boundaries, they need that, around optimism and generosity because it's so easy to be taken advantage of when you don't have good boundaries in place for this sort of stuff. And so, even though I think you came from a very loving place, Moon, and I think you've learned this, you just need to be way more boundary going forward. It gets easier over time as you figure out who's reliable and who's not to reciprocate. But I think this experience has obviously woken you up to a lot of dysfunctional behavior in people. And there will be a time when maybe you rediscover your love of dance and you'll be able to enjoy life in new and meaningful ways. There's lots of, profoundly good stuff with dance. Like you were talking about the body work that you've been doing. That can also be a form of trauma healing. And you may find that like body work, dance is also something that you want to integrate as something as like maybe a healing modality or something. I don't know, maybe not. But the point simply is to say is that life will go on off the back of this for you, even if it really sucks off the back of what you've been through. But yeah, I am sorry that you went through this because I really feel for you. I've been in similar situations like this, not quite as intense, but enough so that I'm like, oh, I was feeling like just, I could really feel the amount of energy poured into this. And I was like, oh God, I feel sorry for this guy. He's being taken advantage of, even though I know there's some positive regard from this guy, but just it's yeah, not great. All right, everybody, thank you very much for listening to this. If you enjoyed this letter reading, please feel free to give the podcast a review. If you are interested in submitting a letter, just as a reminder that I will be taking letters again from about the last Friday of November for a few slots that will be available for December before I go on holidays. Before then, I hope that you all have a wonderful time wherever you may be, and I look forward to chatting on the next letter reading.